Georgia voters and not to disenfranchise Georgia voters. So be very clear. You don't have to wear a hood. You don't have to be a member of the Ku Klux Klan to be engaged in voter suppression. We know voter suppression when we see it. And most often it's less about hate and more about power.
That's right.
But this is America. Everybody has a vote. And everybody has a voice. And sometimes it's a governor, sometimes it's a legislator, sometimes it's a Secretary of State who stands in the way. But be very clear, we will not tolerate voter intimidation in the state of Georgia. And so we are watching this. The world is watching this. We have in front of us some 51,000 pieces of paper. But every piece of paper represents a person. And every person ought to have a vote. That is basic to what it means to be an American citizen.
Amen.
So we will remain vigilant. We are not fooled by the smoke and mirrors. This is a distraction. All of this language about voter fraud is a distraction. There is no voter fraud in the New Georgia Project, and there certainly isn't any voter fraud in the NAACP and the other organizations that are simply trying to give voice to Georgia citizens. Not only is that accusation false, if you think about it, it doesn't make sense. Our effort is to give minority people voice, same voice that everybody else. It does not serve us to create imaginary voters, all right? Who cannot vote at the end of the day. That does not serve our purpose. And for those who want to argue that this is a partisan effort, I beg to differ.
Teach.
Black people, other people of color, Asians and Latinos, when we increase our voter strength, we are a challenge to all parties. Absolutely. It means that you cannot ignore us and you cannot take us for granted. And so both Democrats and Republicans have a reason to stand up and pay attention as our voter strength is increased. And so we submit to you that it will be increased. We will not be intimidated. This sending a letter to some 159 counties saying be wary of the New Georgia Project, this effort to send a chilling message to those who will register voters will not go unanswered. And so we will be watching this. Concerned Georgians ought to be paying attention. I think the Justice Department will look at this with great interest. We intend to continue to register ordinary Georgians, ordinary Americans to vote. This is our sacred obligation. And so, Mr. Secretary of State, stop playing games. Stop with all of the distractions. Stop with all of the subpoenas. Stop with all of the surprise attacks. And do your job. Register ordinary Georgians to vote. To do otherwise is unjust, is unfair, is unholy, is unrighteous, and is undemocratic. So we stand with our partners saying register these people to vote. Let me be clear. This is not a fight for the New Georgia Project. This is not a fight for the NAACP. This is not a fight for any of the political parties. This is a fight for the soul of Georgia and for the soul of America. When one is disenfranchised, all of us are diminished. We lose a piece of who we are because we're all, as Dr. King said, tied together in a single garment of destiny. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. So finally, Mr. Secretary of State, get focused. Get on your job. Register these people to vote. Don't just listen to our voices. Listen to voices of ordinary Georgians who are saying the same thing. And don't just listen to their voices. I hear other voices crying out from our long and difficult struggle.
Come on now.
Saying, register these people to vote. I hear the voice of Schwerner and Cheney and Goodman and saying, register them to vote. I hear the voice of Emmett Till. I hear the voice of Jimmy Lee Jackson. I hear the voice of Fannie Lou Hamer who says, I'm sick and tired.
Well.
So we're sick and tired of this game. Medgar Evers was murdered like a dog in his own driveway, trying to register people to vote. We know our strength, we know our worth, and we tend to exercise it in this wonderful experiment called American democracy.
Do your job.
Georgia NAACP has had an unbroken presence in this state since 1917. We are this state's largest and oldest civil and human rights organization. We have not been invited to this hearing today. We call this hearing a sham. But it is par for the course for this Secretary of State. Throughout his term, he has used his office to narrow the privilege of voting, to reduce access to the polls, to put up roadblocks, fetter the ballot. In 2010, this Secretary of State launched a similar voter fraud investigation. He used the GBI to interrogate over 400 citizens in Quitman, Georgia. One of those citizens being Secretary of the Brooks County NAACP, who availed herself of the law and registered people to vote and gave them an absentee ballot, and somebody thought that was wrong. She was elected to the Board of Education, elected to chair that board. And although she had an impeccable education career, although she had served the citizens of Brooks County, somebody believed she didn't deserve to be choice of the people and the elected board president. So they issued indictments for her, and they arrested her, and they put her and 9 other folks on trial 3 times. 2 of those trials ended in a mistrial. And today, I'm very proud to announce that this Secretary of State's first investigation in voter fraud has ended in a Brooks County jury returning not guilty verdicts. Secretary of State. And on this day, Constitution Day, the day that America set aside to honor that sacred document, made sacred, blood, sweat, and tears of our forefathers, foremothers, those who on distant soil spilled their blood for the ideal of democracy. On this day, Constitution Day, we say to this Secretary of State, you must honor the Constitution, not just in word, but in deed. Those who are extremists in the Secretary's party talk a lot about the Constitution. They also talk a lot about the Bible. Their actions and their policies demonstrate that they've read very little of it. But I read somewhere that the right to vote shall not be abbreviated. In a real sense, the Secretary of State has done just that. In 2011, the NAACP had to file a suit in federal court to ensure that this Secretary of State complied with the National Voter Registration Act. And it took federal court to make him do that. 2012, prior to that historic re-election of Barack Obama, this Secretary of State engaged in an error-riddled process that purged thousands of voters from the rolls. 2013, while folks were talking about giving people more access, the Secretary of State, and I quote, said, if we allow citizens to register to vote on Election Day, then it would be a danger to the freedoms of Georgia. Well, it's strange credulity to believe that. That if our soldiers could fight for Iraqis, march into polling places in Baghdad and dip their fingers in indelible ink and vote, on election day.
Yes.
Georgia should have that same privilege. Here he is in his election year.
Yes.
With a strong opposition.
Yes, yes.
Opposition at the gubernatorial race level and at the Senate level. And he's pulling out all the stops.
All the stops.
This is a tried and true tactic of extremist Secretary of State who accused voter fraud, and I'm waiting to see the proof.
Well,
there is no proof. We asked a week ago for a meeting with the Secretary of State. Surely he should have found time in his issuing of subpoenas to meet with the state's oldest and largest civil rights organization. He has not done that. We intend to go to his office today. I understand he has an emergency meeting of the state election board, and we will be attending that as well. Let me be clear. An attack on the New Georgia Project is an attack on all of us. All organizations engaged in third-party registration. We deeply feel offended by the Secretary of State's language. He says he's engaged in an investigation, but he's already reached conclusions. Saying things like felonies and fraud. Generally speaking, and I'm just a country lawyer from Statesboro, generally you investigate before you reach conclusions. But in a real sense, let me say this. The NAACP and other folks in the civil rights community, we've talked. This is our fight. This is our day. And the NAACP will mortgage every asset we have to defend the right to vote. It is sacred.
yes.
So we leave from this place to deliver the voices, those Georgians who registered. You should be asking the Secretary of State why he has not processed their applications. You should be asking the Secretary of State what his response is to the Quitman acquittals. You should be asking the Secretary of State, instead of promoting Sunday voting in all places, encouraging early voting, and in working with organizations like the NAACP and the New Georgia Project to register folks to vote, instead he issues subpoenas, he uses legal process, and he hides behind the hollow halls of his office. Today we will go over and ask for those answers ourselves. Thank you very much.
Documents and how you know that these books are, all of these books are not on the walls yet. When I asked the Secretary of State, he said that it's the local election officers that process these applications.
So here's the challenge, and we actually walk through the process in your media packets. We know that these are applications that we've turned in. They were not in our incomplete file, so any files that we turned in that were incomplete are not included in this number. But this is based on the Secretary of State's own list of people that we've turned in who showed up on the rolls. 51,423 of those applicants have not shown up, and that's that box. This does not include anyone who we deemed to be incomplete. That means every field was not filled out on those documents that we turned in that were the documents approved by the Secretary of State's office. But to the larger question, the Secretary of State is responsible for the management of elections in the state of Georgia, and that means if there are challenges on the county level, it is his obligation to ensure the processing. It is his obligation to ask the legislature if he needs additional resources to go to those counties. He is the state's elections official, and so if there is going to be an emergency meeting, there should be an emergency meeting to find out why they don't have sufficient resources to process 51,000 applications 6 months after we started this project.
You said there's about 24 applications that are in question. Did the Secretary of State tell you that, or do you know the number that they're looking at right now?
So early on, when this first began, we identified that there were fewer than 25 forms that the Secretary of State, during the 4-month conversation we'd been having with his office, we'd been notified about 24 applications that had some question. Those are the 24 we've talked about. We have no idea what the scope of the Secretary of State's concerns are because he's yet to speak to us. He has yet to speak to us. He's yet to identify and articulate any complaints. What he has done is use very inflammatory language that is not only not grounded in the law, but is clearly designed to suppress voter registration. And one of the things we've done in this briefing packet is explain what the Georgia law actually says. Because we have to be very clear. Right now, the conduit for information is not the Secretary of State. It is the reporters. It is the media. and we need it to be very clear from the media's perspective what the language should be and what the language actually being used is. Fraud is a very specific term in the law. I'm a lawyer, as is Dr. Johnson. I'm a lawyer and I know what fraud is, which is why I've not only taken the law into account, but I've taken the spirit of the law into account. We have gone above and beyond the basic requirements to do criminal background checks. We have run an independent verification process, and we have flagged those forms, and then you will see in your packet, we actually give a form to the county and include on that form, please tell us if you have any problems. Please let us know if we can do better. If fraud is an intent to deceive, then what we have done is the exact opposite. We have been open, we've been transparent, we've been aggressive in our attempt to be open and transparent. We've reached out to the county clerk's offices, we walk in with our stacks, we give them our names, we tell them who filled the forms out, how many forms they've got, and we collate them for them. I don't know what else we can do except not register people to vote, because if perfection is the only standard that the Secretary of State will accept, then absolutely we cannot meet that. But if human error is accounted for, then we have done a perfect system to register voters in the state of Florida.
So to that extent, did you find any of your employees or workers who were doing anything that the Secretary of State has accused, like telling people they have to re-register to vote, and signing up one person who had 3 different forms, different signatures?
I will say this. We don't know what the Secretary of State has accused us of. You may have heard something. We haven't heard a thing. We have yet to hear anything other than please turn over every document you have. What I will tell you is that running a business means that you're going to have folks that you have to train, some folks you have to retrain, and some folks you have to dismiss. And we have released workers because this is hard work. This is important work. And if folks aren't following the rules, then we won't keep them. But that has not been a pervasive problem. And more importantly, there are checks and balances in place, which is why we turn in every form and we flag every form and we ask for feedback. And so when it has happened, we have taken the steps necessary, but that is a distraction from the larger issue, which is that, let's assume it's 24 or 45. 85,000 registrants, 51,000 people. Unless he's saying that all 51,000 Georgians have engaged in an act of fraud, then we don't know why they haven't been registered to vote. And if that's his accusation, then he needs a lot bigger thing than an emergency meeting on Wednesday.
How is this going to impact your ability to register people over the next 2 weeks? Because that's all you have left.
It will not impact us at all. That is the benefit of having this coalition with us, and I'll let Reverend Johnson talk a little bit about that.
It has encouraged our registration efforts. It has stimulated our ambitions. And if this Secretary of State thought that his very damning language that he used was going to have a chilling effect, it has had the opposite. And so we encourage every single Georgian to be civically engaged and make sure that every other Georgian is registered to vote. And not only that, but we turn them out to the polls. This Secretary of State has had a hard time doing his job, and in just a few days, this state has an opportunity to elect someone else.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I can say that the people that I talk to are very offended by this impugning of the integrity of an incredible public servant.
Yes.
In Stacey Abrams. And people are motivated. People are registering people to vote. And as I talk to pastors across this state, they are committed to the idea of voting on Sunday. I've heard of late that there's some people who don't want people to vote on Sunday. But we intend to vote on Sunday. This is a nonpartisan issue, and we intend to make sure that our members and the people that we're connected to make it to the polls. I think it's important. You see these 51,000 names here. Let me indicate that among these names are some persons who were registered by April 20th. And so they should have been qualified to vote in the May 20th primary. And so we have people who registered to vote, who should have been able to vote in the May 20th primary. They never received a registration card. And so they weren't able to vote, although they did what they were supposed to do according to the law. And so while the Secretary of State is pointing fingers at us, he needs to take a hard look at his own office. And there may be a challenge. He may be overwhelmed with the sheer numbers of people that we're trying to register to vote. This is an unprecedented state of Georgia.
Yes, it is.
I'm proud that we have been able to register 85,000 people in a short few months. The whole country is looking to us as a model for how this is done. And if the Secretary of State's office is overwhelmed by this effort, don't create distractions. Don't decide to accuse us of doing something wrong when we're doing something absolutely right. If you need help, ask for help. Maybe there's some willing workers in my church who will come and help you process some of these applications. But we need to make sure that all of these Georgians are able to make it onto the rolls and exercise their basic American rights.
We have time for one more question.
Stacey, the Secretary of State says that the counties initiated some of these complaints. What is your response to that?
Again, the process of verification belongs to the counties and the Secretary of State's office. Voter registration and third-party registration is simply the invitation to citizens to sign up to register to vote. That is what we've done. We turned in, as you can see, a remarkable number of forms. And one of the reasons we took the time to run our independent verification process to introduce ourselves to the county clerks is because we understand that there are going to be issues. We have to, by law, turn in every form that we receive, regardless of the validity of the form.
Come on.
We have to turn in every form. So essentially, what we're being accused of is following the law. We don't have the ability, or should we be allowed, to decide which forms we turn in, because that's when you get into partisan registration.
Yes.
When you get to cherry pick your voters, that's a problem. And as a state legislator, I very strongly support the law that restricts us from being able to select which forms we turn in. And so we don't know if the complaints about these forms are the forms that we flagged as incomplete. They're the forms we flagged as having possible problems. But it's the job of the county clerks, it's the job of the Secretary of State to verify. They have the resources, they have that obligation. We can do nothing more than register and turn in those forms, and that's exactly what we've done. Now, I do want to close with one piece. I've had a good working relationship with Brian Kemp. He is the Secretary of State, and I have worked very hard as a legislator and as a public servant to develop bipartisan relationships, because voting is a sacred right. It is not a democratic right, it's not a Republican right. And my issue today is not one of partisanship. It is one of people and one of policy. I can do nothing more than what the law requires and try to go above and beyond what the law says. And what I'm calling on my friend Brian Kemp to do is to do the same, which is to process these voters, to rescind that subpoena, and to let us know what he needs to get the work done. We are happy to answer questions. We are happy to provide documents. But what we are not happy to do, what we are unwilling to do, is engage in a witch hunt that not only comes after us, but puts at risk everyone else in the state of Georgia who wants to do right by the people. Thank you very much for being here this morning.